So this is the stone that we're looking at straight down there is the one that I featured last night with the man bags on it.
Recently, an answer has emerged, one which not only explains what the handbags are and why they appear across cultures, but which changes everything we thought we knew about human history.
Hidden in palace walls from nearly 3,000 years ago, the same strange object keeps showing up. A handbag gripped by gods. Same shape in Mexico, same shape in Turkey, same shape in Iraq.
What are these handbags? And why are they depicted again and again in cultures separated by centuries and thousands of miles?
Now, an Iranian dig site has handed researchers a physical version weighing roughly 20 pounds, sealed tight and packed with surprises. The crazy part is, when the scans came back, the inside didn't match any ritual bucket on record. What that object once carried could shake the foundation of how we understand ancient knowledge itself. A stone object nobody expected to find. The Yerov site in southeastern Iran has been pulling up oddities for years, but the find from 2025 caught even the veteran diggers off guard. Buried in a layer of compacted earth, partially wrapped in clay residue, sat a carved stone object weighing close to 20 pounds. The shape was unmistakable. A rigid handle arching over a square body flat at the bottom, polished smooth on the sides. Anyone walking past it in a modern airport would assume it was a designer travel bag, except this one is made of stone and it's thousands of years old. Here's the kicker. This exact shape has been staring down at visitors of the British Museum for over a century. Carved into the palace walls of King Ashurnasirpal II, who ruled from 883 to 859 BCE, there are dozens of these reliefs. Each one shows a winged figure called an apkallu or sage gripping the handbag in his left hand. In his right, he holds a small cone raised toward a stylized tree or a human figure standing nearby. For generations, every textbook explained it the same way. The handbag was a bandudu, the Akkadian word for bucket. The cone was a malalu, a purifier. The sage was sprinkling sacred water or pollen on the sacred tree. Case closed. Then the giraffe stone showed up and the case cracked wide open. What most people don't realize is that the carvings inside Ashurnasirpal's palace aren't decoration. They line the throne room. They surround the king on every side. The apkallu figures are positioned as protectors, holding the same bag toward the king the same way they hold it toward the tree.
I've suggested that these objects with handles are similar to ones pictured some 7,000 years later in Assyrian art.
Whatever was inside that container mattered enough to be placed at the heart of an empire's most powerful room. Researchers at the Met Museum in New York have studied a near-identical relief panel for years. Under close inspection, the figure's grip is tense, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The bag never tips. The wrist stays locked. Traces residue on actual metal versions of these buckets recovered from Assyrian palace ruins has shown pollen grains and dried water deposits. So, the sprinkling theory had a foundation, in fact, at least for a while. But then everything changed when the Iranian team ran their 2025 find through computed tomography scans and chemical spectrometry. The interior of the giraffe stone object wasn't hollow. It had internal partitions, small chambers, and residue inside those chambers didn't match plain ritual water or pollen. The traces pointed to organic compounds, suggesting the container may have once held standardized measures of something far more specific. Possibly an early dosing system, possibly a trade weight, possibly something else entirely. 20 pounds of carved stone with hidden compartments inside dug up from a culture that had its own thriving civilization at roughly the same time as ancient Mesopotamia. That alone would be enough to flip pages of textbooks, but that was just the beginning. What hangs in the air now is a quiet, uncomfortable thought. If this bag carried something practical, something measurable, then every winged sage on every Assyrian palace wall might not be performing a religious blessing. They might be administering something, ritual bag or something with real weight behind it. So here's the deal. The Akkadian words bandudu and milialu show up clearly in cuneiform tablets recovered from Assyrian libraries. The texts describe purification rites, ceremonial sprinkling, and offerings made to sacred date palms. Physical metal buckets matching the carved versions have been found in palace ruins, and they line up almost exactly with what the reliefs show. For starters, this means the basic interpretation wasn't wrong. The bag absolutely was used in ritual contexts. The sage absolutely did dip the cone and sprinkle whatever was inside. Pollen from male date palms transferred to female trees would have boosted harvests, blending practical agriculture with sacred theater. That part of the story holds up. But hands down, the real kicker is what happens when you zoom out past Mesopotamia. Look at Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. That site dates back to roughly 9,600 BCE. That's not a typo. 9,600 years before the Common Era. Older than agriculture as we typically define it. Older than writing. Older than the wheel. Older than every Mesopotamian empire by a margin of roughly 7,000 years. And carved right into that pillar near the top sit 3 of the same handbag shapes. Identical handles, identical square bodies, identical proportions. Below them, animal figures parade across the stone in carefully arranged scenes. A vulture-like creature stretches a wing toward what appears to be a human head. Scorpion, snakes, and birds cover the rest. The handbags float above the whole arrangement as if positioned in a sky or a heaven of some kind. There is no plausible way Mesopotamian influence reached Göbekli. The cultures are separated by thousands of years. The pillar was buried intentionally long before the Sumerians ever organized their first city-state. Whatever the handbag meant to the people who carved it into Pillar 43, they came up with it on their own. That's the moment everything shifted for archaeologists studying this motif. Because if two cultures, separated by an enormous stretch of time, produce the exact same object in the exact same ceremonial context, two explanations remain. Either humans independently invented the same specific symbolic object twice with all the same fine details, or some piece of knowledge, some idea, some practice traveled between them through a route we have not yet identified. Both options shake the standard timeline. Same shape, different continents, zero connection. Anyone can explain Olmec Monument 19 at La Venta, Mexico dates to somewhere between 1200 and 400 BCE. The carving shows a seated figure inside the open mouth of a serpent. The figure holds, gripped firmly in one hand, the unmistakable handbag shape. Square body, curved handle, flat base. A weird jaguar figure looks on from another panel nearby. La Venta sits roughly 7,500 miles from Nimrud. The Olmec civilization had no contact, as far as any mainstream archaeologist accepts, with anyone in the Middle East. Yet the object in that ruler's hand could be lifted out of the carving and dropped into an Assyrian palace relief without anyone noticing the swap. And get this, Maori oral tradition from New Zealand tells the story of a hero named Tawaki who climbs into the heavens and returns with 3 baskets of sacred knowledge. The baskets in traditional depictions share the same general form: a handle, a body, a heavy base, containers of wisdom brought down from a divine realm. Egyptian hieroglyphs include a similar domed handle symbol used to denote the abode of a god. New Kingdom tomb paintings sometimes depict deities holding small bags during scenes of judgment or offering. One of the most overlooked aspects here is that none of these cultures called the object a handbag. They called it different names. They told different stories about it. They placed it in different ceremonies. But every single one of them treated the form as sacred, as a vessel of something powerful, and they all carved it with the same architectural precision. Many are not seeing the truth here. The pattern isn't a coincidence of design. It's a pattern of meaning. Across continents, across millennia, the same shape held the same general concept. A container of something that mattered enough to be passed down, depicted in stone, and protected by figures of authority. The disturbing part comes when modern researchers ask the obvious follow-up. Where did the idea originate? If Göbekli Tepe is the oldest known example, what came before it? And how did the same form survive intact across cultures that never met? Then, just when archaeologists thought they had a working theory, the Jerash scans came back with another twist. Modern scans, ancient compartments, and a question nobody wants to answer. Photogrammetry techniques developed in the last decade have completely changed how researchers study old reliefs. Structure for motion mapping captures every scratch, every chip, every microwear pattern on a carved surface. Applied to the Nimrud panels in 2024 and 2025, the technique revealed something subtle but striking. The handbags carved into the stone show patterns of repeated motion on the handle area, as if the original sculptors were depicting an object that in real life had been gripped and used so often that the grain of the metal or stone was worn smooth. The carvings, in other words, reflect a real object with real wear. Combine that with the giraffe stone version, which has internal compartments revealed only through computed tomography, and the picture sharpens. The handbag wasn't only a symbol, it was, at least in some cases, a functional container, possibly a unit of measure, possibly a portable kit for a specific task, possibly a status object showing that the bearer had authority to carry whatever was inside. Turkish teams continue mapping unexcavated pillars at Göbekli Tepe, and early reports suggest additional handbag carvings sit waiting on stones still partially buried. Each new find adds weight to the idea that the motif was central, not decorative. The Iranian giraffe project has begun cross-referencing residue databases with samples from Mesopotamian palace buckets, trying to build a chemical profile of what these containers actually carried in different regions. The crazy part is the data points to variation. Some carried pollen. Some carried what may have been standardized weights or measures. Some carried unknown organic mixtures that have degraded too far for clean analysis. The form stayed constant. The contents changed. That single fact suggests something extraordinary. The handbag wasn't valuable because of what was inside. It was valuable because of what it represented: a standardized container, a common tool, a shared concept of measurement, ritual, or transmission that crossed cultures the way mathematics or written language eventually would. And that idea brings the conversation around to the most uncomfortable possibility of all. What if the object isn't telling us about a god? What if it's telling us about a system? A whisper of foreshadowing settles before the next turn. The discovery doesn't just disturb, it demands a rewrite. Looking back, that was the red flag. Researchers spent a century and a half explaining the handbag away as a simple bucket because they didn't have a framework for what else it might be. Every artifact got slotted into the category of ritual decoration if no clear practical use was obvious. But the 2025 year-off find, paired with the Göbekli Tepe pillars and the Olmec monument and the Maori tradition and the Egyptian symbols, tells a different story. It suggests that very ancient humans, going back further than mainstream timelines accept, shared a common vocabulary of objects and meaning. The handbag may have functioned as a kind of universal sign for portable knowledge, a way of saying in stone that the bearer carried something the rest of the community needed. Sky semicircle over Earth square. That's how some researchers now read the basic shape. The curved handle representing the dome of heaven. The square body representing the foundation of the earth. The object as a whole representing a connection between the two. A container of cosmic order held by figures positioned as intermediaries between gods and people. If that reading is correct, then the carvings on 3 continents aren't telling us about 3 separate religions. They're telling us about a shared way of thinking about authority, knowledge, and the universe itself. A way of thinking that predates every civilization we typically point to as the beginning of human complexity. And against all logic, that idea is supported by physical evidence now. The Urov stone is real. The Göbekli Tepe pillar is real. The Olmec monument is real. None of them needed the others to exist, yet they all show the same object treated with the same reverence, positioned in the same kinds of scenes. It all came crashing down when the scans confirmed the internal compartments, because at that point, the conversation could no longer stay in the realm of myth or symbol. The handbag had weight. The handbag had structure. The handbag carried something specific, even if the specifics varied from place to place. A bridge into the final thought lands here. Here's the part where the story comes down to earth. People watching all of this unfold are looking for mystery, looking for the moment when an ancient secret finally makes sense. But the real takeaway might be quieter than that. The thing is, the handbag of the gods may not be a secret at all. It may be the loudest signal our ancestors ever sent, and we just haven't learned how to read it yet. Think about what would have to be true for the object to mean nothing. Independent groups, separated by oceans and millennia, would have to carve the exact same form with the exact same proportions in the exact same ceremonial context, completely by chance. Possible, sure, but not likely, not given how specific the shape is. Now, think about what would have to be true for the object to mean something shared. Some idea, some practice, some piece of common human heritage would have to have survived in human memory or trade or migration long enough to leave traces on 3 continents. Also possible, and in some ways, easier to accept once the evidence keeps piling up. The Sumerian handbag of the gods has finally been opened. The question now isn't what it held, it's whether humanity has forgotten more than it has ever learned. So, do you think this object proves a lost connection between ancient civilizations, or is it all just coincidence? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more.